Hello, listeners. We are back once again with another episode of Quote Unquote with KK. This is our wealthy event, and I have invited a very close industry associate and a friend who we've been exchanging notes on the Indian startup ecosystem. I have Venktesh Shukla, who is member of National Startup Advisory Council, chaired by our Commerce Minister. Congratulations, Venktesh, for this prestigious assignment that you've taken. Venktesh is a partner of a micro VC fund called Monta Vista Capital out of the Silicon Valley. He was a former chairman of TAI Global and currently the president of TAI Silicon Valley. Venktesh has been associated with NASSCOM on the startup side, has been talking and mentoring several startups both in India and overseas, including the Silicon Valley. Interestingly, Venktesh also is a founding president of Foundation for Excellence for providing scholarship to thousands of poor students to pursue engineering and medical education in India. I had the privilege to interact with Venktesh back in 2011 when I was part of the organizing committee of NASSCOM Product Conclave, and Venktesh, along with several other folks from the Silicon Valley, had consented to travel down all the way to Bangalore and moderate a few sessions and talk about the different issues on the Indian startup ecosystem. Obviously, over the last 10 years, the Indian ecosystem has matured. And today we are at a cusp to discuss the future of Indian startup ecosystem, ready to be the next Silicon Valley. Welcome, Venkatesh, to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I think this is a subject that is close to my heart about startups in Silicon Valley, startups in India, and in general, the transformational change that innovative startups brings into the society. So excited to be here.
Thank you, Venkatesh. Let us kick off on some of the key issues which you have actually outlined in your article in India Today. For the benefit of our audience, would you like to reiterate some of the issues and then we pick up these issues one by one and go deeper and talk about it?
Sure. Happy to. So I think the key points that I made was that since the Prime Minister launched his Startup India program in January of 2016, and I had the privilege of for contributing to that launch and the policies behind the scenes, working with Amitabh Kant on that. It's really gratifying to see how the startup movement has captured the imagination of younger generation in India, and now it's really gratifying to hear that there are more than 30 unicorns. Nothing succeeds like success. For each person who becomes the founder CEO of a unicorn, that person inspires 1,000 other people to become entrepreneurs and take the plunge and try to recreate that magic. And that's the flywheel that keeps Silicon Valley going. Each time there is a Google or a Facebook or Airbnb or Uber or a Snowflake or a Zscaler, hundreds of entrepreneurs get motivated by that, saying that if he can do it, I can do it. And that's how the flywheel of entrepreneurship keeps going. So it's good to see that India has had that level of success in just such a short time. But the biggest transformation that I see is that some of these startups have touched the lives of ordinary people, middle class people. So now my 70-year-old sister in India, she gets food delivered through Swiggy or all those things. She makes her doctor's appointment through Practo. Her daughter-in-law teaches students in her house, maths and stuff. So she keeps busy after her son goes to things. So middle class now has seen how innovation and entrepreneurship can solve problems. So that's the very fundamental shift in the mindset that I've seen, that is not just because this changing attitude towards the value of startups. The policymakers, the thinkers, the influencers, the middle class, they all think now that innovation is a solution to India's problems. Now people are asked questions like, 5, 6 years ago, people used to say, where are the startups? What are they doing? There's just a Flipkart and all those things. They're trying to sell me the same thing. Now they are saying, you see, how come they're not solving, this climate, this thing? How come they're not doing this? How come they're not doing this? Just the shift in the kind of questions that people ask tells me that people have begun to see innovation as a solution to problems that India faces. And that's a massive mind shift from 5 years, 6 years, 10 years ago, when people expected government to do everything.
Correct. Well said, and a great kickoff to our session today. Venktesh, you've seen the Silicon Valley, you operated there. You've been part of our NASSCOM and our Indian ecosystem as well. And obviously, if you see, India is 5 times more than the US in terms of population size itself. But the critical issue is it's a cohort within cohort. And hence, somewhere people say, in spite India having jumped to the 3rd largest startup ecosystem in the world within 10 years. And last year, I guess even during the pandemic, we raised almost about $10 billion in 2020. And I think we have 50 more unicorns in our pipeline, hopefully, which will emerge in the next year or two. Do you think India has the capability to be the next Silicon Valley in this part of the world? And we can probably take up points around each one of the issues. What could be the critical success factors to be a Silicon Valley in this part of the world?
Yeah, let me just touch upon a few things. Does India have the potential? Yeah, of course it does have the potential, right? I mean, I think, there's no reason for Indians to leave India to become successful at Silicon Valley. There's no reason for that, right? I mean, if India can create those conditions, why would anyone leave? No one wants to, no one is given a choice, everything being equal, people like to stay where they are. So the question is, what it is that remains to be done? And there are a lot of things that remain to be done. And I think in that article, I touched upon a few things. There are some, I think just the compliance paperwork, the burden of compliance in India is irritating, very high, and meaningless. Just to issue shares, just to accept investment, I'm told that there are 3 separate board meetings that have to be convened, and one is to say, okay, we will raise money and this is how much we'll raise and stuff. So you have to be very, very precise. Then after you have raised money, and then after the time of issuing the shares, so 3 separate board meetings have to be convened. Just think about it, amount the burden of compliance that a tiny startup has to go through, and the amount of money it has to spend on lawyers and accountants just to do all this needless kind of compliance. All these things were meant, all these laws were meant to regulate and control what they thought was dishonest big companies. These are not.
And we've also fought a Bitcoin angel tax for so many years, which was unnecessary as well.
Totally unnecessary. I personally got involved in that. I wrote a very strong article in Economic Times on that. I, in fact, met the Prime Minister about it. I was so frustrated that
I met the former finance minister who gave this tax when he was first addressing his first public meeting as President of India. And on the sidelines, I asked him what led him to do this. Apparently, this was totally against the canons of taxation, because what was it really delivering to the government in terms of taxes? In terms of the impact, it created a lot more levels of dishonesty, undervaluation, and doing a lot many things which could have been perpetrated, which we should have avoided from. Do you think this whole regulatory framework needs to be even simplified now that you're part of the National Advisory for Startup Council? I mean, we definitely have many more points to talk about, but that's not the intent of today's talk. But I think there needs to be a serious messaging as part of this to the regulators and the ministers.
Yeah.
Seriously take this, because employment generation is one of the key issues that we are facing coming out of pandemic.
So, I think, but all these things I would put in the category of irritants. They're not showstoppers, and there are a lot of show-stopping things have been removed. So in last 5 years, there has been a lot of progress in getting rid of a lot of show-stopping kind of things, right? So that's good thing. But one thing that nobody seems to focus on, and that's a very, very germane to success of startups in India, is this incredibly slow, painful judicial process for resolving disputes. And just think about it, right? If you are a small startup, you're billing. You see your customer is the government or is a big company, and you agreed to this thing. You supplied something to them, and they don't pay you in 90 days as they agreed. What do you do? You have absolutely no recourse. You can take them to the court, but the court, the structure of the judicial system is such that it favors the big guy because they can deal with all these indefinite postponements. They can do all these things. Meanwhile, the startup is out of cash.
Correct.
If a startup, some employee of the startup walks away with the source code, what recourse does a startup have? If someone writes a bad check to you, what recourse do you have? None, because everybody in India understands that going to the court is not a solution to anything.
Correct.
So, I think, unfortunately, this is a state subject. This is not a central subject. But the central government has shown that when it is motivated and when it is convinced, they are ready to move into what is strictly state subject, just as they have done for this mandi and food and agriculture stuff.
Correct.
So I think this issue is not as well understood at the state level as it is at the central level. So central government has to show some leadership in terms of resolving this massive bottleneck. India will never become like Silicon Valley so long as it does not fix its judicial system. Here,
I agree with you.
Here, you see, nobody takes even a smallest guy for granted.
Correct.
Because he can go to the court and get a very, very quick redressal.
Do you think as part of a recommendation, we should have an out of court system like a national tribunal for startup where a quick redressal system could be set up rather than going through a normal court proceedings to set up cases, and then it goes through multiple dates before even you get a stay order and then further hearings and adjudication. Do you think we could probably have a fast track system outside of our judicial system, but following our judicial system as a national tribunal, and within every state you have a state tribunal which could do a faster redressal of disputes and between startups and their customers or their co-founders or different proponents, even the government or the bankers or the investors. If you think that could be a way forward, I think we could move much faster.
I don't know what the exact mechanism should be. Ideally, it should be a structural reform of the existing judicial system. But short of that, what you're suggesting makes a lot of sense.
Now, let me pick up and your ideas and thought on this whole thing of building the next generation of our ecosystem here. And can we really be a Silicon Valley of this part of the world? So one of the feelings I got was that around the pandemic, a little bit of slowing down and whether the Silicon Valley had reached the end of the S-curve in their cycle of innovation or startups, while India was going into the next wave of or the next generation of the S-curve, having done the Me Too models of Silicon Valley post the Lehman crisis, trying, as you mentioned earlier, trying to address the middle 1 billion cohort and working at solving the real local issues here. Do you think this is a right comparison, and are we at a juncture of really disrupting and going at a level of a Silicon Valley in India?
The Silicon Valley's demise has been predicted, a number of times in the past.
Correct.
But it keeps staying, but it keeps innovating, in the new cycles, with the new energy and with new successes. And the reason for that is very, very simple, actually. There are 3 or 4 or 5 ingredients that make it, very, very a fertile ground for sustained innovation. One of them is, of course, the well-known ones are the fact that there are 2 world-class universities, and they have figured out a way to work with the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And along with that, the whole accounting and legal system has evolved with that. Yeah. So that's the well-known portion of it. The other thing that people don't give enough credit for is the fact that in different parts of the world, when people become successful, they leave that to go somewhere. So people who are successful in, let's say, in Russia or France or UK or somewhere, or Spain, when they are successful, they typically pack up and leave and go somewhere else. In Silicon Valley, when people are successful, thanks to the weather and thanks to the all the good conditions here, people don't go anywhere. 99% of the people stay here, and when they're here, they their time and their money becomes available as a resource to the next generation of startups. So very successful qualified mentors are available for the next generation of it, which is a which comes in this thing of soft power, right?
Correct.
The other thing that makes a lot of difference is that all the potential acquirers, a majority of potential acquirer of a startup, regardless of which space you are in, are also in Silicon Valley. So it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to run into someone at a party, at a coffee shop, at a conference, or to arrange a meeting and go see them. So that gives a huge sort of advantage to startups that are here. And that's why you find that even those countries like Israel, where it's an innovation powerhouse, every single company from Israel ends up having a very strong Silicon Valley presence. So that thing cannot be discounted. But and the other thing that works in favor of Silicon Valley is that's a very open system. There are people from 90 different nationalities who are attracted to Silicon Valley to work here, and attracts the best of the talent from all over the world. And that diversity of talent, leads to some innovation. So for instance, this WhatsApp thing, it was started by a son of a Ukrainian immigrant who grew up in Ukraine. He knew that the biggest problem in the world is very low bandwidth internet and very unreliable internet access. So that's how he built his WhatsApp. I mean, this whole memory footprint, the bandwidth requirement for WhatsApp are extremely low. So that kind of insight and that kind of a thing, you have the technology infrastructure of Silicon Valley, but on top of that, you have this insight that only a third world country person could have had, and build the product accordingly. So those are some of the advantages. And I'm not saying that that India needs to replicate all of that, but unless B2B kind of startups in India, they have a long time to go. The only ones that are successful are the ones that go out of India, and there are a variety of reasons for that. But one of the most important ones is that if we have to attract, we have to operate in the global market. If we have to have global subsidiaries, if we have to attract global capital and global talent, the laws and regulations in India are not optimal. So some of the best performing ones, there's an entrepreneur I would not name. He started in Bombay and he was very successful. Then he moved to Dubai as a headquarter. So I asked him, I said, why did you move? And he says, if I have to set up global subsidiaries in each country I have to operate, sending money and receiving money from them was a nightmare. The amount of paperwork that you have to do and the hoops through which you have to jump to say that this is violating FEMA or whatever this thing, FCRA, whatever those things are. Yeah. And I say it was so, the burden of that was so excessive that he moved to Dubai and his life has become 10 times simpler. So I think India has a long way to go. The companies that are targeting only India as a market can continue to stay in India, but companies that are targeting global markets, which would be all B2B companies. B2B companies have to go out because the B2B market is a lot bigger outside than it is in India. So if they are going out, they have no choice but to incorporate outside.
Right. Like our generation where there was intellectual capital flight, we are seeing startup flight because of not a great enabling environment for them to go global, correct?
Yeah. And people blame foreign investors and stuff for this. It's like they should really look in the mirror. Are you creating conditions to see where the startups can operate a global company based out of India?
And then the issues of double taxation and all those things come in with their set of challenges for an entrepreneur. Well said. Venktesh, let me now delve a little bit deeper. You did say what were the key critical success factor of how Silicon Valley emerged, and it keeps on reinventing itself and keeps on going. Let me also talk about what's a sustainable ecosystem that we should probably be setting up in this part of the world for our sort of startup to provide it right inputs and boosts. And would love to get your thoughts as you outline what are the critical success factors for Silicon Valley. How do you think we could probably enable all of that in India?
Yeah. So, I think we have discussed some of the ingredients, I think, which is much more efficient judicial system of redress. There's also, reducing the burden of compliance, and even for simple things like issuing stocks and accepting money and things like that. The third one is creating conditions, looking at the whole range of regulations that allow companies to operate a global company out of India efficiently. And, look at the best practices outside. What is Singapore doing? What is Dubai doing? What is US doing? And incorporate some of those practices in India. So those were the three, at a very high level. But in terms of softer things, this some of the things that you have suggested, actually you mentioned, you see, which is, how do you encourage universities and professors to engage, you see, more constructively, see, with the entrepreneurial ecosystem. In US also, this is a difficult problem to solve. Some of the universities have done a much, much better job than others. So universities like Stanford, Berkeley, MIT, these are at the forefront of that. So what they have done is they not only have a lot of research budget, but they encourage their professors to step out, start a company, building on their own innovation, and to succeed and to become rich on that, so long as the university gets a small cut of that. And the university doesn't ask for a whole lot. I mean, I think Stanford, where a lot of innovations have come and become successful companies, I'm told that it's somewhere between, they ask for some ownership of somewhere between 2 to 5% when the company is starting out. And by the time the company has gone through everything and is ready for public, their ownership percentage comes down to 1%. But if you happen to have 1% of Google, that's a lot of money.
Correct.
So this enabling this virtuous cycle of innovation and individuals benefiting from that innovation, and then coming back to the university to continue they bring that practical industry experience and come back, you see, and start that cycle all over again. There are a number of professors, you see, at Stanford and Berkeley who are some of the richest people in Silicon Valley. So allowing that to happen, I think, is a good one. You mentioned research labs. We have done a very good job in India of commercializing research that comes out of our research lab. In fact, the whole structure of research lab, I think, it's very bureaucratic and it's top down and it's very siloed. The best research, the best innovation, the best research happens typically at the intersection of two disciplines. And the way the national labs are organized, or at least that's what my understanding was, until a few years ago, the way the national labs are organized, that each one focuses on one small piece. Correct. And they really don't interact with each other. They don't interact, with the universities that much. They don't have that dynamism, of new generation of students coming, doing research and leaving. These are the jobs like a government service job. You get in and you keep going up, based on a time-bound promotion, and nothing bad happens to you in terms of losing your job or anything, and nothing good happens to you so there's no downside. There's no significant downside. There is no significant upside. So there is very little incentive for risk taking. So, all those assets are there, but not sure that they are organized for innovation.
How do we
commercialization of that innovation?
Correct. I can just give you one example now. A very shining example is the Bharat Biotech. And since I had been part of the journey of creating the Ignition Grant Policy, Biotech Ignition Grant Policy as a framework, and then that led to the creation of the India Startup Fund under the BJP. Yeah. One of the critical issues that these sort of innovative startups face is not about just the money. It's also a whole host of putting infrastructure, which you could lean on from, say, the research lab. You don't need to buy a huge equipment. You could just work and collaborate with these research labs and get your work done in the initial phases of your startup. Like some of the IITs are supporting some of the startup, as I see, through their incubation and acceleration process. And perhaps the issue here is the professors and the mentors, which obviously we have this Atal Innovation Mission also, is not of great quality. Like what you said, millionaires and billionaires getting created out of the professors in the Silicon Valley. How do we really motivate sort of professors or the teachers or the mentors to participate in the wealth creation through the startup process? I guess that's the issue which we would be challenged with as we go along.
Yeah. No, I think that's the heart of the problem, right? Because ultimately you can copy the business models, from Silicon Valley and other places and start companies in India. But the true impact happens, when research that is grounded, in the realities of India, that gets commercialized, that's where you'll have a much bigger impact. And by the way, that's happening. That it's not the case that it's all binary 0 or 1. Some of it is already happening. I met an entrepreneur who just raised, you see, a round of money here in Silicon Valley. His company was valued at 900 million, and he started out in the incubator of IIT Madras.
Right.
So these things are happening. There's another entrepreneur I know who is making this industrial grade fans, and he collaborated with IIT Bombay in terms of building the fans that are now he has a global market for that. So some of that is happening. I think it's, I don't know what kind of bottlenecks exist today in terms of making that, a much bigger proportion. But I would think that universities and research labs have a huge role to play in terms of because these researchers are thinking of solving the next problem anyway.
Right.
I don't know about Atal Innovation Mission. I don't know how successful that has been. I have no idea. I know that they have been starved of the funds after the first year that they got money. I'm aware of at least one such private sector led initiative that was funded by Atal Innovation Mission. They got money only 1 year and they haven't received any money after that for the next 2-3 years. But they keep having to comply with all kinds of government bureaucratic forms and this, and they haven't seen the money. They keep filling all those forms in the hope that someday the money will come.
Right. And that's the same issue of the whole accelerators where the government is wanting to cross subsidize. But I want to just discuss, since you're going to be part of the Startup Advisory Council, how do we really, there are good intentions with this government. I wouldn't say that, but there are the money flow for some of these initiatives with the private sector chokes it down and slows down the whole process per se. And that needs some innovative thinking for us to build a new way of working or collaborating with the government, whether it's for the funds, whether it's for the government-owned universities, or whether it's the government-owned research labs. I guess we need to really rethink and overhaul this whole process where the budgetary support that the government is giving actually trickles down to the accelerators and all these other players from the private sector side. Otherwise, these are only missions on paper then.
I think the problem is that the way the government spends money, and thanks to the bad experiences over the last 70 years, where how the corruption and stuff, the requirement for audit trail, the requirement for objectivity, and all those things are so strong that the burden of compliance is extremely high before anybody can dish out any money. And the only solution to that is what government did, with the matching fund kind of thing, where they give the money to SIDBI, and SIDBI sets up its own council that selects the funds to who gets the matching fund. And that completely short circuits the whole process, where now you are delegating you gave money to some agency, SIDBI, and now they're using, the judgment of experts to dish out the money. And so that, I think, some mechanism of that kind, I think Atal Innovation Mission, if we were to be spun off from the government, instead of being a government department, it becomes an independent agency. And then that burden of compliance doesn't trickle down to every single recipient of the money. I think government had considered at the time of inception, of having Atal Innovation Mission as a separate agency rather than some a part of Niti Aayog. Niti Aayog is government basically.
Correct.
So they had considered it, but I don't know why they didn't go down that path. I'm sure they must have had good reasons. I'm not aware of the thought process of that, but something like a SIDBI approach to giving money to the funds, if they can replicate that approach, for the beneficiaries of Atal Innovation Mission, it would be a lot more effective.
I want to pick up hot on a couple of recent events. One is the ban of Chinese app in India as a market per se. The issues around privacy and fake news of Twitter and WhatsApp. On one hand, these are good protective environments for our own startup ecosystem to build something world-class. At the same time, it could also become a retaliatory measure for our startups which are going abroad and overseas to build a market, and which again leads to a larger protectionism, expansionism for the startup. How would you like to probably address some of these Silicon Valley issues coming out of Facebook and Twitter, where they're not self-regulating, and the head of the state has to, or the government of the day in another country has to warn them about some of these misdemeanors or some of policies that they want to bring on the consumers or to the governments in other part of the world. How do we address this? Because obviously when our startups go abroad, we'll also be challenged the same way.
Yeah. No, it's a very profound issue, and it's an unresolved issue. I think this is a big challenge you see in every country, not just in India. Even in US, this has become a huge issue, and no one quite knows you see first of all, let's agree on the fundamentals. The genie is out of the bag. You cannot put it back together. Even if people are saying that, okay, let's break up Facebook. You can break up Facebook, but the technologies and approaches that have been used to collect information on you and to make your consumption of Facebook and Twitter more addictive, those things you see are very well known now. So even if you put some restriction on Facebook and Twitter, there's no stopping the next one to do the exact same thing. I mean, there's a new social this thing has started called Clubhouse, and Clubhouse you see is exploding. Is audio only, and that social this thing network is exploding. It is the next thing to Facebook. But guess what? If you join that, you have to share your contact book with them, and which means now they know who you are connected to, who you are this thing. So again, the social networks, their success depends on you sharing more data about yourself than typically you would like to.
Correct.
So I think that's a challenge. Unfortunately, that is a big challenge. Is how do you handle that thing? It's a challenge in US. It's a bigger challenge you see in countries like in India, where Facebook and Twitter are not even based. So if they are not based, how do you control that? I mean, Facebook has both the challenges. There were challenges that there were some extremely anti-Muslim rants. They went unchecked on Facebook in India.
Right.
And on the other hand, there was some, and they made some mistakes on the other side also. So I don't know how this is a huge kind of a challenge. You see that there is no easy solution to that. Building your own social network in India is probably not a solution either, because anyone who follows the Facebook model will end up doing the same thing, which is how do you make it more and more addictive so people spend more and more time, and they are exploiting this psychological insight that if you are in an echo chamber which reflects your biases, which reflects your prejudices, you tend to spend more time on it. And another psychological insight is that bad news travels faster than good news. So Facebook has mastered those two things, and that's why it's become so addictive. Any other network, which whatever other name, if it follows the same two things to become successful, will have exact same challenges.
Let me also just talk about the geopolitical interference of some of these startups. We had a Google sheet which was floating around on certain very serious issue of sedition in India, and that went viral on Twitter. And obviously Twitter did not want to take action. Does this sort of startup need to be encouraged in India, or do we really need to take a very drastic action like what we did on Chinese app by banning them? And that helps bringing up the next generation of startup to cater to the Indian consumer, bound by the Indian regulation. And then let's see when they grow bigger, whether they need to then move overseas to address international markets and consumers.
So, it's interesting you raised this question, and you also raised this hope of building the next Silicon Valley. So, in Silicon Valley, people innovate and do things that are not explicitly banned.
Correct.
That's how Uber got started. That's how Airbnb got started. It was not explicitly banned, but it ran contrary to all the taxi regulations in every city. But it was not banned. So it was allowed to take hold. It became a force by itself. Now it's negotiating, with some leverage and strength. And nobody can deny that the society as a whole has benefited from innovations like Uber and Airbnb. Assets that were lying idle are now being put to use. The human assets as well as capital assets like cars. entrepreneurs, right? But if you have the mindset that unless it is explicitly allowed, you won't be allowed to to start anything. It's a very, very different mindset that puts a boundary, puts innovation within bounds. And putting innovation within bounds means you are giving a role to governments, which means you are giving a role to bureaucrats, and entrepreneurs and innovators would rather not deal with that. They would rather go somewhere where they express their ideas and pursue their innovation unrestricted in a completely unrestricted way. So India has to decide whether they want that Silicon Valley style freewheeling innovation and then deal with the regulations later if it creates a problem, or starts a culture that unless you are explicitly permitted, you cannot innovate in this space. And by the way, there's a good reason why WhatsApp could not have started in India. It could not have, because the day it started, it impacted the revenue of telecommunication companies, the cellular operators. The day it started in India, I can guarantee you it would have gone nowhere. Started is one of companies that I know of. They started a free conference call facility for small business in India. Guess what happened? It was exploding like wildfire. This is about 5-6 years ago, 7 years ago.
Right.
Guess what happened? They got a notice from TRAI, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, saying that you don't have a license to operate.
Right.
To apply for a license. They applied for a license and it was rejected. Guess what happened to that company? Shut down.
Right.
So you think WhatsApp, if it had started in India, would have gone anywhere? No way.
Nope.
So if you say that we want to operate like Silicon Valley, you have to have the mindset that regulations cannot keep up with innovation. And therefore, either we can say that unless you see regulations allow, you cannot do this, or we take a much more enlightened approach saying that do whatever you feel like, unless it is explicitly banned that you cannot do free conference call to small business. Unless we have a regulation like that, you are free to do whatever you want. So the mindset of innovation, a freewheeling innovation that cuts across existing boundaries, that's where the true innovation happens. And if you were to constrict that with regulations here and there that no, unless we approve it, you cannot do this. हर सांस के बाद दूसरी सांस लेने के लिए अगर इजाजत की जरूरत पड़ेगी, innovation will not flourish. Only thing that will flourish is the copycat ones.
Let me bring up another issue, which is the risk-taking ability and skin in the game of the entrepreneurs here versus those in the Silicon Valley. I see a very, very big gap. And how do we fill in this gap per se?
Explain the gap in risk-taking.
Many of the guys over here, when we are looking at investing, are not really big around their innovation and their business model. Where their issue is the capital and their ability to take risks on a very small scale and not willing to go all in, putting their skin in the game to say, I will take it forward. I guess the counter side is the risk of failure for them and not able to be able to think through their game, and hence not willing to take the hardest risk on any bet that they want to take. So that's what I'm really thinking, which I find is not so true in the Silicon Valley ecosystem of the entrepreneurs.
No, you're right in that observation that that Indian entrepreneurs, with some honorable exceptions, are hesitating to think big, and you're right about that. I think, and I don't know how to solve that problem except one of few entrepreneurs who take on a global challenge, succeed from India, and then others follow that model. Others get emboldened by that success, and they begin, to take those kind of successes. And I'm aware of at least 8 to 10 such companies in India, startups from India, which are becoming globally successful in B2B space. I mean, there is a company called Grey Orange, there's a company called Innovator, there's a company called Unifor, there's a company called Seclor, and Drua is already moved to Silicon Valley. Correct. So these are all companies that started in India, and they started solving some of the big problems that the global companies have, and they are reaching some level of success. None of them is at the level of let's say Google or a Snowflake or anything yet, but I think some of them will get there. So what my hope is that just look at it. I mean, India has started on this entrepreneurship in innovation kind of journey, and only in the last 10 years. The Startup India movement was only 6 years, and Silicon Valley has been doing this for last 50-60 years. So I think there is some time lag, but I think succeeds like success. One or two of these glorious successes would embolden a lot of other entrepreneurs to think big. But meanwhile, it is the role of the mentors and the investors to nudge them into thinking bigger.
I've been mentoring. I've been on boards of a couple of startups. My major challenge is, it's the telling attitude here. They're always asking, what would I have done? Rather than challenging me to address their ability to think on a problem, which again comes out maybe in the way we've been taught in schools and colleges, and the way the US education system and the university system challenges them to think onto the problem and come out with a solution. I guess it's a more of a cultural issue that I as a mentor also cannot challenge them. It always comes back, what would I have done? Rather than challenge them to think out of the box to address the solution to the problem.
You may be onto something. You may be onto some interesting insight here about the education system and how that does not prepare youngsters to think on their own feet and take their own challenges. You may be onto something there. But another reason for that could be that most of the entrepreneurs in India are really, really young people. They're all in their 20s sort of thing. And people you see who become entrepreneur when they are in their 40s and 50s, they have already had some success behind them, and they could not have succeeded by listening to others all the time. They're used to making decisions. They're used to making trade-offs and thinking on their own. When they become entrepreneurs, they have a very different approach. So that points to yet another problem in India. And you may have some insight about why that is the case, that in India, people in their 40s who have had 20 years of work experience, they don't become entrepreneurs. I cannot think of a single B2B success story in this country. Well, I can think of some, but overwhelming number of B2B success stories in Silicon Valley are started by those who have had 10, 15 years of industry experience before starting their companies. That phenomenon completely is non-existent in India. And you could tell me, why is it that people who are married and with kids, you see, they don't take the risk? Younger people do.
Correct.
But people in their 40s and 50s do not become entrepreneurs in India. I mean, maybe you have some insight onto that.
I do. I've been talking to a couple of my own friends who started off late. They're at a stage in life, it kind of mitigate their ability to take those risks to move forward. Secondly, I have been investing into a lot of B2B startups. The real challenge over here again is somebody who has an industry experience and wants to go global with a startup or an idea in a B2B space is really not encouraged by the VC and the early stage investment community as well, because the hype created around the B2C, like the Flipkarts, the Olas, these Me Too startups in the first generation have really taken these senior executives not to take the punt into entrepreneurship, although they may have some very brilliant ideas, but it's just the time to go to market, create the market over here. And when you are trying to, as a startup, trying to go to large corporates, they want to have your experience showcase into other, large corporate. It's a chicken and egg story for a startup in a B2B space to an executive who's leaving his job in his mid-40s to really do a startup and stick it on for 5 years with his own cash, or maybe using his friends and family to really sustain. So these are some of the challenges that I've seen with some of my friends and peers who have started startups, and they really had to struggle their way through before a VC or an early pre-VC round fund could really take a punt on them.
Yeah. No, I don't know what all the reasons are, but I think there's something to reflect on. India will not create successful global companies out of India unless people who have deep industry knowledge and understanding, which means people in their late 30s and 40s, decide to take the plunge.
I agree with you. Venktesh, I want to pick up a little bit on the mentoring issue here. You mentioned earlier some of the professors who have been very successful, made the money, and then they put in their skin in the game, put in the capital, started mentoring, going back to the university system and started mentoring and encouraging new set of startups. We have a very challenging problem of mentoring over here as well. And last week, I was actually delivering a keynote address to a cohort of startups along with the ITBT minister and the secretary for the ITBT in Bangalore. Mentoring over here is not a very glamorous profession per se. And most of the mentors over here don't have a startup experience. I would say 50% of the mentors here are executives with no startup experience.
And they make a very bad mentors.
Correct. And that's the challenge that I see in terms of our mentoring ecosystem has become people who have failed somewhere in their job and they decided to take up, chalo, kuch kaam to kar le, let's do something. and then they bring in their failures and their fears onto the startup. And this is where I would like to understand, how do we really build a robust mentoring ecosystem? All this Atal mission I thought was trying to address it, but I think it's fizzled out. And that is where we would need to do something about it in a very serious way.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. But part of it is again, the pool is small, right? In Silicon Valley, the pool of potential mentors is massive because there are thousands of companies that have started over the last 50 years that have been successful, and each company has 10, 15 people associated with it that go on to become angel investors and mentors and stuff. So part of it is a matter of time. I think I don't know how to accelerate that, because if the pool of successful entrepreneurs in India is only 10, 50, 100 and they're distributed all over India, I don't know how you get the critical mass. The only way to do that is the kind of steps that India is taking. Just have more and more startups. Some of them will be successful, and a subset of them, you see, will be motivated, you see, to work with the next generation startups. So I don't know how to short circuit or accelerate that. Sending potential mentor to a class is not going to do it.
No,
It's
I
not.
think we need to invite some of the Silicon Valley people also to say,
So
hey, have a look.
so I'll,
These could be global potential
so I'll tell you
startups.
what I'm doing in this area. About 5 years ago at TIE, we had launched a program called Billion Dollar Babies.
Mm-hmm.
And Billion Dollar Babies was essentially picking 3, 4 startups from India that had global potential, connecting them with mentors and our resources of TIE and Silicon Valley to accelerate their global success. And I'm very pleased to say that out of the 4 companies that we had picked up, one of them got acquired. Dhruva
Oh, wow.
became a unicorn.
Right.
Seclor is now on to Series D round of funding.
Right.
And Unifor is almost a unicorn. It has 900 million valuation. So out of
Excellent.
those 4 companies, all 4 of them, you see, succeeded beyond our wildest expectations. So we have relaunched the same program. We are calling it India Advisor Program, and we have we are accepting applications. So these are the companies startups based in India who have global ambitions, and when we pair them with very, very successful people in Silicon Valley who want to give back to India.
I think that's a great initiative, Venktesh, and I would really wish you all the best. And I guess we should
So what
probably
I'll do
create
is
this sort of capacity.
So what I'll do is I'll send you some information on that, and
Please.
please spread the word.
Excellent. I would do that. Venkatesh, I want to change gears on a very special topic about social impact startup. Not a very glamorous area in India. We're coming out of a pandemic, and there are a lot of social goods and social repair job to the last mile of the consumer that needs to be done. And not to say that it's almost a $1 trillion opportunity as a market. I have been part of the regulatory setup, the social stock exchange as well. That would mean that a lot of the donation grants and environmental social governance type of funding would be available. But the real challenge here is the boot up problem of getting social entrepreneurs, like what we were challenged to get entrepreneurs for startup back in 2008. I think that's another big opportunity where India could become a showcase for Silicon Valley for social entrepreneurship. How do we go about it? And what are your thoughts here?
I think India has a unique opportunity to innovate. I heard someone in India describe that US innovates, for the top 1 billion of the world. India has an opportunity to innovate for the other 6 billion, of the world. And I think that's where the social impact thing you're talking about comes into play. I think it's Indians are full of entrepreneurship. They are second to none when it comes to entrepreneurship. They are second to none when it comes to innovating. I think what is the missing pieces really are: is there enough funding available, and is there enough of mentorship available to scale up those kind of things? From a funding side, I'm aware that at least 4 or 5 there are dedicated funds in India for social impact now.
They're part of my regulatory committee as well, where we have been discussing these regulations as well.
Yeah. So I was pleased to learn that there are at least 4 or 5 dedicated social impact funds in India. I mean, Unitas is one, Ankur is another one, and so the Avishkar is another one. So there are at least 5 sort of dedicated social. Omidyar, yes. Yeah. So these are all. So funding is now gradually becoming available, though at a much, much smaller this thing compared to the regular VC funding, but that's the way it is normally here also. So the funding is becoming available, and I think how you inspire people to become entrepreneurs, the good quality people, and how do you? I think one thing the government could do is mandate that X percentage of its budget, would be spent in securing from these kind of startups. Otherwise they have to jump through hoops. If the government says at all levels that 2% of the total purchase budget would go to these kind of startups, then they're not competing with big companies. They're only competing among ourselves, and that probably would go a long way. But that's just an idea. I'm sure there are other ideas also, but India does have that opportunity, and India is making progress in that direction now.
Now, before I let you go, Venktesh, I want to pick up one point about the concentration of Silicon Valley in Valley versus the huge geographical spread of startup ecosystem in different clusters in India. And obviously, when you are in one location and you have a whole collaboration, there's a lot of collaboration between startups. What I am observing here, even in an accelerator or an incubator and various other, concentrated clusters also, startups don't collaborate. How do you enforce or encourage a environment of collaboration? Although I made this also a point in one of my keynote that I gave in Bangalore a couple of weeks back. They're just trying to do it all on learn from somebody else who's already trying to solve something and collaborate. This is what I see really happening in Silicon Valley setups.
So here also you would find that people who are physically together, they run into each other, they discuss with each other, and they learn and benefit from each other. But if they're not physically in the same location, you have to make an extra effort, and you are so deep down into the nuts and bolts of your own startup, you really don't have time to investigate and explore what other things other people are doing outside. So unless it is in the self-interest of the founders, that collaboration is very, very hard to take place. And that collaboration happens if the investors, mentors, and the board members are aware of similar opportunities, and then they nudge and introduce people to each other. That's when it happens. But ultimately, collaboration for the sake of collaboration is a bad idea. Collaboration in the self-interest of the companies is a good idea. And that could be facilitated either by clustering in physical location and letting nature takes its course, or the responsibility falls on the mentors, investors, and the board members.
Excellent. I think there are a couple of very, very key takeaways that we have got. If we were really to build India and our startup ecosystem like the Silicon Valley. Venktesh, I really appreciate you talking very candidly to us and our listeners. Many of them are startup entrepreneurs as well. Before I let you go, I need to thank our team over here, our sponsors, our team that has created the content, and I would really encourage Venktesh to take some of these discussion even to the National Advisory Council on Startups when you meet to the minister. I'm sure there's a lot that your experience and our experience of having dug the ground in the last 10 years in the startup ecosystem, where we can probably bring the benefits of your experience of the Silicon Valley and our experience here having worked in the startup ecosystem to really make it much more vibrant and at the scale at which Silicon Valley operates.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great. Well, thank you for inviting me. Appreciate that, and look forward. All right. Thank you very much.
Have a nice day ahead. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.